everyone, I'm Princess Link, and welcome back to Metal Gear Solid 4. Also, I have an enormous bowl of salad. Act 1, Liquid Sun. Let me tell you a story about the snake I know best. The snake who was my friend. Oh my god. Why are you like this? The snake who changed my life. Seated on the back of a crowded military truck, his AK-47 propped up beside him. Yeah, I accidentally turned my fan on earlier. I got my Otacon shirt on. And also, it's apparently by visibility day, so... You know, anyway. He was smoking. Well, I wasn't there to witness it, not yet, but that man was never without his smokes. If any of the other soldiers packed onto the flatbed minded the smoke, they didn't show it. They faced a far more imminent death than lung cancer some decades down the road. From them, to abstain from the simple pleasure of smoking would be absurd. Just minutes later, their veins might be spilling onto the ground through holes punched through their skulls. Bullets might be rolling around inside their guts as they writhed in agony. Oh my god! Why? Stop. Stop it! Stop it! Okay. Nothing would be as ridiculous as banning soldiers from smoking. The Nazis enacted the first nationwide tobacco ban as a measure of public health, but even Hitler couldn't keep it from the soldiers in the field. War and smoking came as a pair. The man exhaled smoke and squinted up at the sun, too far inland for the cool sea air to reach. The man's harsh glare passed unimpeded through the crisp, dry air. Most of the soldiers had wrapped cloths around their heads to protect their vulnerable skin from the brazen sun and sandstorms carried by the arid wind. The road was, almost without exception, unpaved. It was less a road than a tire trail. The single line of trucks, old and plain, but rugged, followed the path. From the gaps between the wooden boards running along the sides of the flatbed, a man glimpsed the occasional stone building, all of them abandoned. They were approaching a city, or what had once been one. Shut up. Its inhabitants had long since left. What? Okay. For how could a family casually go about their daily routine with bullets flying everywhere? A few men, known as operators, were mixed in with the soldiers, jostling about on the backs of the trucks. Many of the soldiers were local militiamen of varied experience and training. The operators had been sent by PMCs, or private military companies, to organize the rabble into a disciplined fighting unit. My friend was there in the guise of one such operator. He registered with the local PMC and came to the battlefield as a mercenary. PMCs were the enterprise of turning war into a living, the enterprise of providing the means to make war. The PMCs offered the tools of waging war to any who sought them. They turned people who had never fired a single bullet in their lives into capable soldiers. They worked with arms merchants to provide the necessary material: training, equipment, command, transport, supply, medicine. All aspects of war were organized under the domain of business. The actual act of the war itself was only one small fraction of the vast market. Even the operators were commodities on the battlefield marketplace, simply workers selling their labor. Only their work was combat, and their workplace was the theater of war. Half a century ago, mercenaries existed as independent contractors. Even the largest groups of them were small squads, and they worked for whichever army would pay them. They didn't fight for the sake of any ideology, or for any nation's cause, or for a religious belief. They fought for money and nothing else. Without any reason to band together out of loyalty, there is no means for them to organize. With the end of the Cold War, these outlaws began to form larger groups. The era of opposing superpowers capable of mutually assured destruction had passed, and small wars erupted around the globe. It was as though the hoops had fallen off a barrel. Some peoples hadn't been able to escape historical grudges. Some zealously wanted to prove their God was absolute, and others, oppressed by hopeless poverty, gathered into armies. If we at least have guns, we can kill each other. With swords and axes and the like, people had to be close enough to watch their blade pierce helmet and skull. Unlike those primitive weapons, guns were tools for massacre and designed for ease of use. Just a squeeze of the trigger and some distant foe would flop to the ground. But to make war with them, that's a different matter. For that, a soldier needs to undergo the right training, to be given the right equipment, and learn how to execute the right strategy. The first company to begin filling those needs was a mercenary agency called Outer Heaven. Considered to be the first PMC, Outer Heaven was headquartered in a fortress in South Africa, from whence it dispatched mercenaries to conflicts around the world. Founded by a legendary mercenary who roamed the world's battlefields during the Cold War, the company was revolutionary, even when considering the history of conflicts that had followed World War II. In the chaos that came with the end of the Cold War, Outer Heaven announced to the world that war didn't have to be between the armies of nations. The man who had destroyed that organization was sitting in the military truck, an old soldier, exhaling cigarette smoke. He leaned against his propped-up AK, ready to throw himself once more into the flames of war, whipping every last ounce of life out of his relentlessly aging and probable body. His name was David. He was the son of Big Boss, the legendary mercenary and founder of Outer Heaven. David was also a legend. In the secret histories of war, he was known as Solid Snake. Their enemies already knew they were coming. Snake looked up and saw a canard rotor VTOL scouting craft, part helicopter, part jet plane, flying across the yellow sand and over the convoy. The governmental army would no doubt be waiting in the abandoned city ahead, taking up tactfully advantageous positions based on the aircraft's reconnaissance. The moment the trucks crossed into the ruins, the battle began. The vehicles stopped, and waves of militiamen leapt from the flatbeds. If even half of them had been really prepared for the fight, things might have gone better. Worse still, the PMC troops hired by the governmental army had indeed known of the militias coming, and had set up snipers' nests in buildings a safe distance away. Militia forces, armed only with AKs more suitable for relatively close-range combat, fell one by one, their heads shattered by the onslaught from two-man cells of snipers and spotters. But there came a point when a soldier had to trust in his instinct and leap into the fray. One way or another, he'd have to... One way or another, I'm gonna see you, I'm gonna get... Don't judge me, I love that song. I'll slip on the hair for another. I'm gonna lose you. I'm gonna trick you. I'll trick you one way or another. I'm gonna lose you. I'm gonna trick you one way. Anyway. He'd have to throw his body into the maelstrom of bullets. But if he ventured into the chaos alongside everyone else, maybe the probability of the enemy targeting him would be lower. Snake waited for his instinct to discern the right moment. Then, without further hesitation, he spurred his old, tired body and leapt to the ground. Directly in front of him, a soldier whipped back. Red oozed out the back of the man's head, and a soft lump of fragmented brain tissue struck Snake's clothing. Not that the seasoned warrior let it faze him. The instant Snake touched earth, he was already moving, headed straight for the nearest cover. The area around the trucks was already piled with corpses. The PMC snipers on the government side expertly dispatched most of their targets with single shots to the head. Those targets unfortunate enough to have the bullets miss their heads or hearts and instead hit their lungs or stomach lay on the sand, twisting in agony. There is no luxury of a battlefield medic here. Maybe the PMC unit was well aware of that reality. In previous wars, inflicting non-fatal injuries, legs, arms, was the more effective tactic. The downed soldiers' comrades would have to drag them to safety, tying up 2 or more combatants with one shot. But the militia had no system to save the fallen and no techniques to administer aid. Moreover, they hadn't any medical supplies to use. Any casualties would be left behind. There simply wasn't any other choice. Without any benefit in simply injuring the militiamen, the PMC was better off shooting to kill. Snake wound through the scattered bodies and dove into the shadow of a partially destroyed house. Truck after truck passed through the city gate, spewing forth militiamen. Some soldiers, seeing the hellish battlefield, froze with terror. Others, who had taken the initiative and jumped from the flatbeds first, had their heads blown off before their feet hit the sand. The soldiers' fear was understandable. This wasn't a battle, but a massacre. Snake tested the action of his AK by firing 3 single shots. On the third, his trigger locked. The ejection point was jammed by a chunk of broken metal. Bad ammo. The casing had swollen inside the chamber. Snake clucked his tongue in frustration and tossed down the useless weapon. The rifle clattered out from the shadows, where it was immediately hit by one of the sniper's shots. The impact of the shot kicked the jammed gun even further out of reach. Snake made a wry smile, appreciating the shooter's skillful aim, despite the realization that the sniper had him cornered. Just then, a low, angry, bestial bellow rumbled through the sky. The cry some cross between that of a cow and a pig. The militia fighters looked at one another. The war seemed a harbinger of a demon's descent to the battlefield. It's a cow. It's just a cow. The cry was that of an animal, though doubtfully like any the militiamen had ever heard. There, Snake saw them. Off in the distance, large unnatural shapes leapt through the spaces between the half-destroyed buildings. They hopped like frogs and quickly closed in on the battleground. I'm sorry. Not only do they sound like cows, they're named after these tiny little lizards. That are so cute. Like, it's a gecko. And it's like a tiny little lizard. No. Not only do they sound like cows, their names they have some really dumb names. I mean, if they're supposed to be scary, maybe don't name them after tiny little lizards. There was a thunderous crash. Snake turned to look at the source of the noise and saw that a military truck had slammed into the city gate. The overturned vehicle's driver slumped upside down, blood streaming from the bullet hole in his head. The anti-government forces were now cut off from their reinforcements, and in front of them waited only the ruthless PMC snipers and those approaching beast-like creatures. Suddenly, silence fell over the battlefield. All the gunfire ceased, like a conversation halted by awkward silence. "Death approaches," said one of the militiamen. It was an oddly dreamlike statement. Several of the men nervously looked about. Snake stood steady, knowing that the battle was only turning for the worse. A giant object came down from above. It was a kind of leg. What else could it be called? Some poor fighter was crushed beneath it, his body cleaved in two. And not only that, they also shit. For some reason. Ba. The creature's legs had the shape of a bird's, but bulged like 2 olive drab sausage tubes stuffed full of meat. Perched atop the organic legs was the mechanical tank-shaped head. Indeed, the thing seemed to be a miniaturized version of the nuclear-equipped bipedal tank Metal Gear Vex. Snake recognized the shape immediately. These things were Metal Gears too. Anti-personnel Metal Gears without nuclear warheads. Unmanned weapons. The lives of soldiers in wealthy countries were worth far more than the lives of impoverished militia. To protect those valuable lives, economically advanced nations and the PMCs hired by them had pursued new combat capabilities. Driven by artificial intelligence, these robots were capable of thinking for themselves and made decisions without the need for human input or control. The robot was a superb combatant. It swung its legs, each as wide as a tree trunk, and set militia fighters flying into the stone houses. As the men slammed against the walls, every bone in their bodies shattered. They were dead in an instant. More Metal Gears kept coming. Were coming. They hopped through the helpless militia forces, scattering the fighters and kicking them into the air like soccer balls. No, they're footballs. I'm American, but I will fight you on this. It's football, not soccer. What is soccer? What is soccer? It's nothing. You use your foot, you use your feet, so it's football. Anyway, the robots were produced by AT Corp under the codename Irving, but were commonly known as Gecko or Lizards. The machines quickly overwhelmed the militia with an adroitness befitting their moniker. I don't think that's how it's pronounced, but whatever. Also, what? That sentence makes no sense. The militia forces dispersed into the ruined city. Perhaps that was the PMC's goal, to split up their opposition into smaller, weakened units and then pick them off one by one. Snake realized it was time to go. He wasn't here to help the militia. With the sniper's attention drawn to the scattered soldiers, he began moving away from the area in front of the gate. Snake hadn't come to the battle to throw in with either side. History had seen its like in many lands and many times, and more would surely come. But one point differentiated this war from those known to the past. This was a proxy war, fought by contracted mercenaries and manufactured unmanned weapons, not on behalf of any nation or ideology, and not for the purpose of obtaining resources or advancing the cause of a people. ID-tagged soldiers carried ID-tagged weapons, used ID-tagged gear. Nanomachines inside their bodies enhanced and regulated their abilities. Genetic control, information control, emotion control, battlefield control. Everything was monitored and kept under control. The PMCs were supervised and controlled. Battlefields, once the embodiment of chaos, were regulated, made routine. Supervised battlefields, supervised lives, not the war to which Snake had become accustomed. But even if the war had changed, Snake still had a role he must play in it. His last role, his life's finale, to stop his brother's plan to throw the world into chaos. So I'm going to end that here. That's not the end of the chapter. But this chapter is so long. So long. But this is about halfway through, so I'm just ending it. If you like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!